All right. I think we're ready. Okay, then.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is Lonnie Reed. This is actually, this is our last meeting of the year for the full Green Bank Board of Directors. And not to underscore it yet, but I think we have a lot to be proud of. So just say. Let's see, before we go to public comments, I think, Brian, you wanted to do you and the senior staff have discussed some agenda changes to postpone some of the deeper discussions until January. So
yes, thank you for that, Chair Reed. So just a couple of proposed changes. So the first one is to remove agenda item 6A, which is the residential renewable energy solutions update, and 7A, the energy storage solutions update to January. So we just finished up our annual review through PURA for both of these. We're super excited to talk about what ended up in PURA's final decisions there. We didn't want to give short shrift with such a condensed agenda that we have today. So I've talked to the team. We're going to move that to January and spend a lot of time on it because multifamily affordable housing is front and center in it, which we want to give you all some time to interact and engage with the staff to learn what's happening on the state incentive side and then the federal incentive side. It's super exciting. So again, we just didn't want to cut the time down given all the transactions that we have. And then 2 and 3 are essentially moving agenda items so that they follow a better flow. One transaction will lead to informing the next transaction. So as we work through the PowerPoint presentation today, you'll see that adjustment will just make more sense instead of being disjointed. So that's the proposed agenda changes. If the board's okay with those changes, we'll proceed as proposed.
okay. Everybody's okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good. Okay, hearing no objections yet. Let's see, moving on to public comments. Hear any public comments? And actually, I should also say this is our Connecticut Green Bank Board meeting for December 15th, 2023. And then the consent agenda. Brian, did you want to go into those items? I know the meeting minutes, but
yes,
CPACE extension and
exactly. Yeah. So we have 3 resolutions for 3 items. Our standard meeting minutes from our last board meeting, an extension of a prior approved CPACE transaction in Stamford, and 2 revisions to our regular meeting schedule for next year on the board and the joint committee. So those are resolutions 1 through 3, and then 3 report outs, one on Butterfly, which the board approved last meeting, but the team wanted to provide some more information in the memo on the rubric that we use for the Green Bank Capital Solutions RFP assessment. So you'll see that in there. We've got our Q1 financial statements, condensed and comprehensive, in there, and then an IPC quarterly report. So resolutions 1 through 3 are on the consent agenda.
Can we move them as a group, or? So I move that we approve the consent agenda.
do I hear a second?
This is Bettina. I'll second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, passes. Moving on.
Right. So the first item here, this is one of the ones that we were going to move. So you'll see this agenda item 4A come later on. So we're going to actually move to agenda item 4B. And I think Bert and Desiree, you'd be leading on this one.
Yes, actually, I'll be. Oops. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
No. Okay, great. Actually, I'll be turning it over to Larry Campagna and to Desiree in a moment. But this transaction falls under a board-approved program for long-term for term debt investments to third-party commercial solar ownership platforms. And since that authorization was granted back in 2018, that authorization, which was $30 million allocation of capital, but an allocation of capital only, meaning each transaction has to come back to the board for specific approval, as we will be doing for this particular facility for MVCP in a moment. But since that time, $29.5 million of capital has been allocated or reserved for various transactions, and outstanding under that program is now about 13.6 out of 17 million that was advanced over a number of facilities, and those include names such as Onyx, Sunwealth, Skyview, and Inclusive Prosperity Capital. So the transaction before you today that Larry and Desiree will go through is another transaction that is falling under that program. And a little bit later in the meeting, we will be asking the board to actually raise the cap from 30 million to 50 million, as well as changing the way we account for the capital allocation limits. So we'll get to that as a subsequent matter for the board to consider. But I'm going to turn it over to Larry right now, so he can start with the presentation on this. Larry?
Great. Thank you, Bert. This group of projects is all through the Down East group of projects, which is owned and operated by MVCP, and we'll get into the two managers of that group. It's contemplated as a debt loan up to $10 million for 35 projects. Those 35 projects are all identified and are in various stages of development and construction and operation. This is a mutually beneficial group of projects, both to the borrower. It increases their rate of return and allows them to do a larger number of projects with the same amount of capital. And to the Green Bank, we'll get a return on this investment. It will help us reach our mission goals. And it is a really, if there is an easy way to develop 35 projects, I would have to say this is it. A lot of the work has been done by Down East, and these are all in phases of development now. So it's much easier to issue debt for 35 projects than it would be to issue debt for 35 projects individually. So these are all coming to us at once, which is a big advantage, so that we're able to do a lot with less administrative effort. So the borrower's structure is interesting at MVCP because they've never held debt and they don't hold debt. So this would be unique for them and is specific to this project finance arrangement that they have for this group of 35 projects. The borrower is led specifically for these solar projects by two individuals, which we've developed a positive working relationship with over the last year that we've been working through this project in due diligence. Philip Thompson runs this family office, MVCP, and has 20 megawatts of current solar development experience. James Patnod has been brought on specifically for solar. He specializes in this field and has completed over his career 80 megawatts of solar. So these are really people with experience in this type of project. And we are also familiar with the EPCs that they're currently considering. We've underwritten the group MVCP and recommend them. And if the board approves this group of 35 projects up to $10 million, we will also underwrite each individual project before debt is issued for that project to make sure that it meets all of our debt criteria and ratio criteria. And we've already begun to collect all of that project level information now in a data room. So next slide, please. So the interesting thing I'd like to point out about the projects themselves is that there is significant diversification in these 35 projects. Mm-hmm. They're located throughout the state of Connecticut. They have different sizes, and they're different types of businesses. Except I suppose I would make one exception, that there's about a dozen storage unit rental facilities. But other than that, different types of businesses, different types of ownership, different types of sizes. So there's not a concentration that's very significant in any one type of solar project, which is good. And it will also help us when we go into underwriting for the individual projects. As far as the structure of the actual group of projects and how the program will work, I will pass it over to Desiree. And for the next slide.
Thanks for providing an overview of the Down East deal, Larry. Let's take a closer look at the deal structure here. So this is a back-levered loan, which the Green Bank has used before in similar transactions, such as the ones we did with IPC, Skyview, and Sunwell. In this green rectangle here, you can see the Green Bank is lending to MVCP, which sits to its right, the blue rectangle. So MVCP stands for Miller Family Venture Capital Partners. It's an investment fund which benefits 3 separate family trusts, which are its beneficial owners. MVCP has 2 investment vehicles to develop and operate solar facilities. Technically, they could do solar and storage. In the current pipeline, we're just looking at solar, but they're open to solar and storage as well. So one of the LLCs is called Down East OZ. That's for any solar project located inside an opportunity zone. And then below that, any opportunity zone project would be its own holdco. If a project is not in an opportunity zone, then it would just go into Down East Renewable Energy LLC. In addition to collecting debt right from MVCP, which is very well financed, as Larry mentioned, holds no debt. They have over $100 million in assets. We're going to be collecting revenue from the utilities through the buy-all-sell-all tariff. So obviously the utilities investment grade partner, and we're having the tariff revenues associated with the 35 solar, or most of the solar projects assigned directly to Green Bank. Ultimately, the Down East deal is considered project financing. So the solar projects themselves are what we're underwriting. In addition to, as Larry just spoke, we've underwritten MVCP, which is very creditworthy. And so we're going to size our debt according to the cash flows we expect the solar projects themselves to throw off. And so yeah, this is another interesting part of the deal is the trusts themselves have a tax appetite. So the solar, so we don't need to bring in an external source of tax equity here. It's all kind of consumed by the Miller family, not my Miller family, this Miller family, venture capital partners. And that's all. We can move to the next slide
Yeah,
for resolutions.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
would just emphasize the point, Desiree, that this transaction follows the pattern of the other transactions that we have done, Sunwell, Skyview, in particular, and each of the transactions as they are projects as they are approved and before they're funded, they have to go through a rigorous diligence process, which we have done many megawatts of this work over the last 10 years. So the team has developed quite a bit of expertise in this area, and we've got a whole asset management type of review process after the transactions go in place to monitor performance and make sure that the assets are performing as expected. So anyway, back to you.
Yeah, just over to the resolutions. I don't think I'm going to read it out, but
No, you don't have to. I just want to ask one quick question, just another example of what the projects look like as opposed to, in addition to the storage unit rental facilities. Is there one other example, quick example you can give us?
yeah, there's a church, there's one,
Okay.
there's
There are
Desiree,
five municipal structures.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
I had a question, Desiree. So, I mean, it looks like a great counterparty on the other side, and you guys, as Bert said, have all this down on how to vet them. So my question is, I mean, they seem like they could get this loan from a
Yeah.
traditional lending source. So what is it that we're giving them? Like, why are they coming to us? Should we be using our money for some things that are less plain vanilla? I mean, this is, couldn't they get financed through a private bank?
I mean, they're extremely creditworthy. They could also finance through their own balance sheet. By giving them additional capital, we're incentivizing them to develop more solar. We're increasing their rate of return by giving them debt between 5 and 6%. And that is going to encourage them to build more and more solar in Connecticut.
I think we've also, I'm just going to say quickly, I think we've been told by the financial community that some of these family investment funds are really looking to do some socially responsible, have some socially responsible activity, and they're really looking for this kind of thing in the clean energy arena.
That's
I'm
true
just
with this
wondering-
family.
I'm just
They're
wondering
also-
what they get from us that they wouldn't get from a bank. It seems like they could go to a bank and get this unless we're giving them a better interest rate or something. And so the question would be like, just thinking on our big mission, solar is pretty well established and these guys are pretty creditworthy. Is there stuff where we can make a bigger difference than helping people who could get help elsewhere?
So these are.
I think that-
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think this question has come up before, Matt, and I think Louise has weighed in on it as well. I'm not sure if she's on the line at the moment, but the reality is that while yes, a bank, a financial, regular financial institution bank, call it a regional bank, could in theory do this. As a practical matter, these smaller transactions, and many of them are smaller transactions, they contain a lot of deal friction, and the diligence involved and the time involved for processing those credits and taking that particular risk on is really not something that we've observed and that these sponsors have observed really attract the attention of these banks. They're time intensive. As I say, the risks that are involved, unless you really are familiar with the risks like the Green Bank is, and recall that we are capable of taking these transactions over. And because we have many megawatts in our portfolio. So we actually sit at a unique position that distinguished from a regular bank. That's able to take this on, and another bank would have to charge us, much more in terms of of an interest cost to, or servicing cost to kind of compensate for all those factors.
Okay, thanks. No, that makes sense. Thanks.
I would
So-
I would also say that as we're building our portfolio right now, one of the things that, you know, we're not in a position where we're actually squeezing the resources of the Green Bank yet, but if you look at all the activity that is coming along, we've got the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, et cetera. So all these things that are happening, and our remit has been expanded. There is going to come a point where we're going to have to take a number of these transactions, pool them, and then invite our local bank partners, Webster, Liberty, M&T, et cetera, to participate with us in these transactions and recapitalize. And that's going to be the point where it makes sense for the banks to come in and say, well, great, you've done all the work, give us a diligence package, we can review it, we'll put it in a pool, finance it, and then it makes it easier for them because they see that these transactions, which are really 20-year investments, you know, we've seasoned them for 2 or 3 years, and now they can come in and participate alongside the Green Bank. So we get the mobilization ratio of private capital in a way that is comfortable for those lenders. Does that make sense?
Yeah, especially I like the second part too, Barry. That was kind of what I was thinking, is at some point it would be a squeeze. So that's why I always kind of wonder that, but that seems like a good strategy to me.
Any more questions or concerns? Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 5?
So moved.
Thank you, John. Do I hear a second?
This is Rob, I second.
Thank you, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? All right, moving on to our next item.
Okay, and this is similar to an approval that the board granted back in October for the Solar Lease 2 project. And that project was actually, that withdrawal was actually completed. So thank you to the board. We now own 100% of Solar Lease 2. And it came to our attention in that process of saying we would do Solar Lease 2 and then look at Solar Lease 3. It seems that we had an opportunity to try to close Solar Lease 3 out by the end of the year. So we talked to the parties, U.S. Bank and CohnReznick, and figured we had maybe just enough time in one board meeting to get this all done. And Louise Della Pesca is going to walk us through this transaction and this opportunity. Louise?
Thank you, Bert. Yeah, a comprehensive background there, and hopefully the structure of what I'm going to talk you through is very familiar and rings a lot of bells from the October board meeting. So the background to this request and transaction is that the Green Bank, via its subsidiary Cephia Solar Services, set up a tax equity partnership with US Bank in 2017. This tax equity partnership was set up to own commercial solar assets. It was kind of set up on the back of the success of other collaboration with private sector partners. So Solar Lease 1, you may remember, and then Solar Lease 2, which is the fund that we discussed back in October. So then came Solar Lease 3, again working with the US Bank. It was set up as a partnership flip structure, and as is typical for those structures, it's envisioned by the governance documentation that the provider of the tax equity, which is US Bank in this case, would exit after what is known as the ITC recapture period has ended. So basically, when they've gotten the benefit that they were always expecting to extract from the partnership, that's when they're motivated to then withdraw from the partnership. So we engaged a independent appraisal of the fair market valuation for the stake that US Bank holds in CT Solar Lease 3. We used Cohn-Resnick again, just like we did with the work for CT Solar Lease 2, and that helped because we achieved some kind of efficiencies in that work. They used a discounted cash flow model, exactly the same approach as they took with the work they did for us on CT Solar Lease 2. Just recently obtained a fair market valuation from our advisor there, and the way that the operating agreement is structured for this particular transaction, CT Solar Lease 3, is that we're in the cool period where we can choose to exercise our call option and buy out US Bank from the partnership, but there's a minimum buyout price to do that. So there would be the price that we would transact with US Bank at would be either the greater of this minimum buyout price or the fair market value. So if that happened to be higher, as it turns out, the buyout price is slightly higher than the fair market value that was provided to us by Cohn-Resnick. We don't have a number for you here on this slide. You'll be able to find that in the memorandum itself. For confidentiality purposes, please refer back to the memo to see the number itself. And our request today is to grant approval for us to transact with US Bank. US Bank's very eager to transact, and so are we by the last day of this year. And we would like approval to transact at a not to exceed minimum buyout price, which can be found in the memorandum. Any questions? I think the next slide is resolutions.
Any questions? Matt?
No, not yet.
Just want to make sure. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I just want to point out, and I'm not sure if it was covered by what Louise stated, but this would be with effect of December 31 of this year, right at the cutoff point from a tax point of view. So that will make the books very clean. We will process the books through this calendar year, which is the same as the fiscal year in the ordinary course. And then next year we'll pick up with a new 100% ownership by the Green Bank. And so it makes it very easy for Jane's group to do all of the accounting as it's happening at the very end of the year, at the very last day of the year. So provide some administrative efficiency there. So that's another reason why we're so anxious to get this.
This is John Harity. I had a question. Do we actually directly own a lot of assets? Is this normal or unusual?
It is. We do own the assets in these two solar funds. We've had ownership interests in these projects ever since we started these solar funds, John.
Okay, thank you.
That was the whole nature. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Any more questions or observations or concerns? Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 6?
So moved, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Second?
Second, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, moving on to our next item. So this is a discussion of CPACE, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
This the hydroelectric project, an
Okay.
energy efficient project at Cargill Falls.
Oh, this is
And,
Cargill Falls. Okay.
Mariana
Bert.
Treef will
Oh, Mariana.
Mar-
Okay.
do that for us. Thank you. Thank you, Mariana.
Yes, good morning. And I promised Brian I'd be quick on this one, given the amount of things in the agenda. So I'll be quick and you can all stop me if you have questions. If you could go on to the next slide. By way of background, our CPACE loan at the historic Cargill Falls Mill project is CPACE $6.2 million loan to a mill redevelopment for mixed-use residential and commercial, which has 2 hydroelectric turbines and energy conservation measures. It's a project you all have heard a lot about. And the last time we came to the board was back in June, where we gave you all an update. Since then, the hydro has been operating. It started operating in the summer, about June, July, and the property is already seeing significant utility bill savings with a reduction of their utility bills by about 76% since the hydro began operating. Next slide. From the property side of the business, if you all recall, there was lead found in the property and an order by NDDH to test and abate property units where children under the age of 6 reside. All of that was completed. And further testing for the rest of the property was done, supported by DOH funding. And that testing came back with 51 additional units requiring abatement. And we are now in the process of working with a contractor to obtain quotes on what that abatement will cost, or budget on what that will cost, so that we can continue to work with the property and with DOH on coming up with a plan for abatement of the property and in those 51 units requiring abatement. Another update for the property is that a number of units who had participated in a lawsuit or housing action suit were most of them were dismissed once the housing suit or mediation took place, and only the property only had to settle with two units for approximately $10,000. So the funds that had been held in escrow, the rent that had been rent in escrow, was successfully returned to the property. And the reason why that was done was because the property complied with the abatement requirements once the suits were sent to the housing court for mediation. However, in other news, the property manager informed the property that they will not be renewing their contract, and therefore the property is looking to hire a new manager. They are in deep discussions with one property management firm, which is well known in the state, and they're likely going to come on, but there's uncertainty with regards to how that will affect their cash flow. Given everything going on, primarily further abatement that will be required, a new property manager, which we're not at the point yet to know how that will affect the property financially. Then we are coming to the board for a recommendation for 1 more year of CPACE loan deferral to allow for the property to stabilize from the new manager of the abatement. And I guess hand in hand with the abatement, there are vacant units that are not being leased up until they have been abated. So I'll stop there, and the next I guess the next slide is a resolution for approval to defer, again, the loan for another year with the Green Bank working towards the loan starting repayment in January of 2025.
Excuse me, Mariana, I'm not sure. Did you mention about Paul Haynes and the deferral there?
I did not, and I can mention that here. The only other hard money lenders to the property is Haynes Construction Company, and they've been deferring in the same way that we have over the past year. Given where the property is now and the improvements, we believe that there will be enough cash flow to make interest-only payments on their loan during the first 6 months of the year. So they've agreed to those accommodations. And if there's cash available with principal and interest payments being made to that lender starting in Q3 of calendar year 2024.
Yes, we've had a very good relationship with the contractor. If it hadn't been for that contractor, Paul Haynes, and his company, with the financial support that they brought to the project, this project would not have been completed. So we really appreciate the fact that they have agreed to forbear along with us in this process, and we also appreciate the support of the Department of Housing and being our partner in this transaction. So, you know, this is just taking a while to work out, but we're moving through all the steps, or I should say, the project is moving through all the steps, and this is the reality of where we are. But we're seeing daylight, as you can see, with the energy costs that are being offset by the hydroelectric facility, which is good to see. That was always the dream all along. It's an electrified facility in terms of the units themselves. So ultimately, we're going to get to a really good outcome here. But it's, you know, we've just hit this, as you know, we've hit this bump in the road. So this is just recognizing reality and practical consideration. So appreciate the board's support on this. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions or concerns? Just a quick question for me. Wasn't there a huge demand for this housing initially? Is that still happening, or has that kind of abated?
No, there continues to be demand, and in fact, the units that were vacant where there was no detection of lead after testing are in the process of being leased up again. The reason for the current vacancies is because the property has taken the stand of not leasing them up until those have been abated, and also because the abatement process is easier when there's no tenants in those units.
Yeah, sounds like a good liability decision.
So we're using the project is using those units as hotel units to kind of move people around. Earlier in the process, we had to actually put people up in Airbnbs, and not we, but the project had to put people up in Airbnbs and things like that. It was very much of a dislocation. So with these available units on site, those people can be moved into those units. The other unit then can be abated, and then they just do a switchback and then keep moving along. So,
okay, questions?
Yeah. Go ahead, Adrian.
Sorry. Yeah, my question was that given the deferral of the payments on these loans, is there any opportunity for catch-up in the future? You know, once everything is rented out, will there be sufficient cash flow to reimburse us the extra interest that's been running, or any part of the principal that should have been reimbursed? What's the situation there?
Yes, we're pushing this along. We're not writing interest off. If we were writing interest off, we'd actually come back to the board with a write down provision in accordance with our process. So we fully expect that over the course of years, which you know, this is a long-term project, that we'll be able to recover all those funds.
Good. Any other questions? Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, this project's been around a long time, and so congratulations to the team.
Yeah.
It's really a big milestone that it's hydro's operating. And I will say, as much as this has been very frustrating for a long time, it does mark some of the really good qualities about our staff, creativity, persistence, overcoming really crazy odds that, we never really signed on to. But it also, I think, represents a big risk for us. I mean, we kind of got deeper and deeper into this deal, and we continue to get deeper and deeper into this deal and not get any return. And this is not the first deferral. It's not the first time we've increased the money for this. I mean, it's really gone well beyond the scope. We've learned a ton, I know. And like I said, in general, this project shows a lot of, I think, the best qualities of our staff. But sometimes you can care too much, I guess. And we really have gotten sucked in. So Bert, I guess my request is two things, because I feel like as a board member, we get this and it's kind of a Hobson's choice. We never really have any other options. So if this comes back next year and it's not ready for repayment, could we get a list of other options of how to exit this project? Not that I'm saying we should do that, but we should know what they are. And
Sure.
two, could we, as a follow-up, get a sculpted repayment or, like we normally get with a new CPACE of what the repayment looks like? Like, I think this was supposed to go into repayment long ago. So what will the cash flow look like in whatever, year 20 or 15? I mean, has that metric really changed as everything else around this project has changed? I think it'd just be good for us to know what the owner is going to be facing in terms of repaying these deferred dollars.
Well, the owner, I think on the positive side, Matt, and I don't want to take too much more time because we have a lot of other things to get to. But I would just say that because rents have just been improving more generally, that has actually helped the project out. And we have a cash flow sweep that is involved once we get Haynes repaid and taken care of. So I have a feeling that we're going to actually work out pretty much as we expected because of the increase in the market rate rents for those portions of the units that are market rate that project will be able to realize. So I think we're going to be in good shape as far as that's concerned. But I'll remind this board, I was dragged, maybe not screaming, but certainly kicking years ago. Now I'm ready to scream, but.
Well, and you also had to go through COVID with this project.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a huge, when everything just stopped. And
right.
You had to start dealing right away, and manage to pull it this. I keep thinking of what my dad used to say when we whined, if it were easy, anyone could do it. So ultimately, hopefully, it's going to be a huge marketing asset for us when it's full and people love it because it's beautiful. It's really.
We're going to look hard at the next project like this.
And I think, Lonnie, that it's also telling that despite the issues that the property has had with lead, and obviously there are folks that are not happy about it, and they took the opportunity to do housing suits, which again, we're all most in favor of the property, that there's still a wait list. There's still people looking to move in. And during that entire time, the property told tenants, if you guys want to cut your lease out like before time, we won't charge you sort of any of the breakup fees, and you can feel free to look for somewhere else. And most of the folks that stayed on the property and those that moved out were usually because they bought a house or because they changed jobs. So there's still real demand for housing in that part of the state.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Bettina, just a real quick, have they made any payments at all?
Yes. Yes, there was a small payment.
There was an interest payment done January of this year. And there was, I believe, one more payment the cycle before that in July of 2022.
And after that, the cash levels were at a critical point, and so we really we worked it out with Paul Haynes. We just said, look, we need to put this thing right. We need to conserve cash, help the project conserve cash resources, because there literally were no options. We weren't going to come back to this board and ask for any more funds, and so we just said, look, we have to pull together here and figure out which is which, how you get there. So, and we did.
Okay. Any more questions? Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 7?
I motion to approve. Rob.
Oh, Rob, thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second, John Hardy.
Thank you, John. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Moving on to the next item, and actually this sort of falls into the same lane of how do we measure risk and monetize the things we do. And so who's going to talk to us about that?
That's me, Madam Chair, Eric.
Oh, Eric. Oh, great. Okay.
So, oops, next slide, BG. So wanted to bring to the board today an update on our process for monetizing environmental market assets. So currently, we're active in 3 asset types that are linked to the project financing we provide, but are separate from that. So renewable energy credits, both our SHRECs and our non-SHREC RECs, which the board I'm sure is aware of, our activity in forward capacity markets, and then carbon offsets, specifically from our electric vehicle charging project. These have been a growing portion of revenue for the organization for the past couple of years. As you can see below, we've gone from 10 million in fiscal year 21 to 15.5 million in FY23. And these are slated to continue to grow both within these categories, but also as we're expanding into environmental infrastructure and looking at ecosystem services. So we thought it was prudent to look at the various processes that we had and procedures that we had around these 3 and look to kind of standardize. So next slide. We approached this with kind of a view of how do we measure or manage risk while optimizing optimizing profit, for lack of a better word. And we basically looked across all of these and we reviewed processes and procedures. So what we did is we standardized, and it was primarily between the REC processes and carbon offsets. So we looked at the 2, we looked for similarities, and we said, ultimately what we're doing kind of comes down to the same couple of things. We're trying to manage the quantity risk, so we don't want to overstate the quantity that we have and oversell in the market what we have and then end up with a lack of production. But we also want to manage market volatility and price risk. So we want to have the ability to lock in pricing in advance while continuing to manage that risk. So next slide. So ultimately what we've done is we've put together a standardized process across these where we're looking at forecasts and estimates. We're updating those based off of the data that we collect. We're managing that on an ongoing basis. And when we get comfortable, we're proposing to sell to enter into forward transactions to monetize portions of these assets in advance. As these assets do get created, we should have ideally a majority of those assets committed, and then the remainder would be monetized in the spot market. This is currently what's being done in the REC
for our RECs, it's kind of updating the carbon offsets to follow a similar process and procedure. In forward capacity markets, our processes now more further documented, virtually goes untouched, and we're really reliant upon our partner CPower for our activity there. So we're basically coming to this with the principle that we want to limit what's sold in advance to lock in pricing and sell the balance after the asset has been fully created, so that we're limiting the risks around quantity. Are there questions or concerns, or can we move to a resolution?
This is Don. I had a question around the process. For the spot sales, are you using third-party brokers, or how are you, what's the process for selling that?
Yes, we are using third-party brokers. We have a number of relationships both across the for RECs and for carbon offsets. We're using them both for forwards and in the spot markets, where we do have the ability to enter into a transaction with a direct purchaser, and that pricing is favorable. We would certainly do that. I think that there are opportunities across both asset types for us to build out longer term relationships with direct purchasers.
Okay, great. And those would be sort of long-term offtake contracts directly?
Yeah, so if we had, just looking at the forward piece, we would stick by the forward rules that are proposed in the attached memo in terms of percentages and look to make those types of commitments with the direct purchasers, as we have done on the REC side with, I believe that would, I'm going to blank on the utility at the moment, but we have done that with a direct purchaser on the REC side.
Eric, it was Constellation.
Constellation, thank you. I see a question from John, and I saw Joanna's hand as well.
So, well, I have a question, but I have to tell you, I accidentally clicked that hand, and I don't know how to get rid of it. But anyway, I was just curious about how much of this analysis will end up being done by AI.
Interesting question, John. At the moment, none. So none in terms of the actual monetization portion. We do have opportunities to leverage AI in some of its lower forms in terms of the data review. I don't think we have anything that I would certainly classify as AI. I would say it's more along the lines of optimization and the use of algorithms to identify exceptions around data collection. But we certainly aren't at this point close to allowing a machine to make decisions for us.
Good.
Joanna?
You mentioned ecosystem services, and as we're looking at other assets where the market is still developing or being created, what will be the process for understanding that valuation and then the other sort of the payback or purchasing mechanisms that might be evolving from that?
So this is where I'm going to really need to rely on Lee, because when it comes to things beyond what we've stated here in terms of RECs and carbon offsets, I'm wholly unfamiliar. So I think that we would come back to the board with an updated procedure as we're entering into markets that are different from what we've stated here.
And I'll just chime in, as I was called in, that would be really dependent on the underlying market conditions of whatever the asset was that we were looking to transact on relative to those ecosystem service markets, as they're pretty particular relative to each protocol.
It's definitely something I'd love to continue conversations around, especially as we're looking at ecosystem services, both for carbon sequestration or resiliency measures. And there's sort of a greater push from the federal government on natural and working lands and the role that they play on both of those.
Excellent. Just two quick comments. One is we're starting to help our staff and the board understand ecosystem services through our environmental markets guide. So that was one of the guides where we try to walk through the 101s through the 301s of ecosystem services markets. We've got a fantastic new addition to the team in Lee that's going to help us think about that. And then secondly, as you can see, we measure a lot of the performance that happens as a result of the projects that we do. So we have meters, we're using machine learning, as John and Eric just talked about. So we're big time data collectors. We do it because we're trying to tell the story of the social and environmental benefits as a result of the investment in these projects. But it just may be that the markets for various ecosystem services, whether they're compliance or voluntary, just aren't ready yet. But we measure everything, and that's a principle that we operate by as an organization. So knock on wood, I feel like we will be ready for those markets as they develop, and in some cases we'll actually drive the market and push the market. Good opportunity, we think, Joanna.
And then Matt, I think you had a question as well, or a comment.
Yeah, no, I'm all set. I thought better of it.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
And
Do we hear a motion to approve Resolution 8?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second, this is Rob.
Oh, thanks, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay,
thank you very much.
let's see.
Okay, this is the commercial solar expansion, Madam Chair.
Yes,
yeah, this is
okay.
Rearranged agenda. So as I had teased out this morning, earlier in the meeting, we, because of the success of the commercial solar program that we talked about with the credit that was approved earlier, we need an expansion of the capital allocation for this program. And Luis Della Pesca is going to walk us through that right now. Thanks, Luis.
Thanks, Bert. Yeah, so just casting minds back to Desiree and Larry's presentation on Down East and the transaction that was presented there. So that is an example of the market demand for the Green Bank's commercial solar program. Essentially, this is a multifaceted financing program. It includes equity investments, debt investments, development capital for projects that we develop as the Green Bank and then either own or sell. So there's a lot going on in the program. I think it was first approved by the board in 2018, and there's been numerous times since then that we've come back and added things to the program. For example, at one stage, we increased the capital allocation from 15 million to 30 million, which is where it stands at the moment. And the reason that we're coming back today to talk to the board is that of that 30 million, 98% of the capital has already been assigned or allocated to various different transactions. I'll talk about a few of them in the next slide. And there's no sign of the demand slowing for these types of products that the Green Bank is putting out into the market. The Down East transaction is a great example. That's $10 million. That would obviously take us way above the 30 million, of which 98% has already been allocated. So demand remains strong, and so our request to the board is to expand the program essentially by allocating more capital up from 30 million to 50 million, which we expect could give us between 2 and 4 years more worth of run rate to do more deals such as third-party debt financing or development capital for projects that we develop and then either own or sell. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of how we got to that 98% of capital having been allocated from the 30 million that the board approved. So just some names that Bert has mentioned as well earlier, a debt financing with Sunwealth, 2 other debt financings with Skyview Ventures, 2 debt facilities with Inclusive Prosperity Capital, in the process of doing various development projects where we're putting our own equity in for solar projects at various municipalities around Connecticut. And then quite recently, the board approved another debt financing for Sunwealth and a third-party ownership platform in that transaction, which hasn't closed yet. We're still in diligence. So that's just a flavour of the types of transactions that this programme has been able to put into the market, and we hope that we can carry on with a increased allocation from 30 million to 50 million. Any questions?
Yeah, I guess I just have one question. I'm just trying to understand, maybe I missed it. What's the overall rate of return? What's our return on the 30 million? And when we add the 20, if that's the ask here, what's the expectation of additional return?
It's a good question. If you just flip back one slide, just to give a flavour for what some of the rates of return here. So a lot of these, in fact, every item in this table except the one where the counterparty is various municipalities and solar contractors. Every other item there is a debt, either a term or a construction financing facility. As interest rate environment has changed, over the years since 2018, we don't always use the same interest rate on those facilities, but the range is between 4.5% and 6% for either term loan financing or construction financing on those debt facilities. And the debt facilities are proving to be the most popular way of using this capital allocation at the moment. For a development project where we would be looking to own long-term a solar project for its life of 20 years, then the internal rate of return that we would target would be somewhere between 5 and 8%. So it's difficult for me to forecast what the rate would be on the extra 30 million that hopefully the board will approve the allocation of. But those are some flavours for the different rates between debt and equity investments.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or observations, concerns?
I'll just remind the board that what we do is that with the back leverage, which, for example, in the transaction that the board approved earlier, as a debt transaction, we kind of vary the required rate of return based on the end user. So if it's the NRES utility credit, it's a 5% return because it's a very stable. It's pretty much pegged to the bond yield of Eversource bonds, their Eversource and Avangrid. So and municipal transactions are at the same rate. So and then we go up higher from there. I think we're topping out at 6%, which is comparable to our rate of return in our CPACE program. So that's just to give you an idea for the debt side.
That's really helpful, Bart. Thank you.
Any more questions? So this is resolution 4. Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve resolution 4?
So moved. Adrian speaking.
Thanks, Adrian.
You're welcome.
Do I hear a second? You're here a second. It's always good to hear your voice. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Matt, oh, go ahead.
Okay, so that was John.
Yeah.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay. Moving on.
All right, so the next slide here, as I noted before, we're going to move the environmental infrastructure update on waste and recycling to the end. We have removed the residential renewable energy solutions program or moved it to January. So we'll come back to this on affordable housing. And now we're at solar map, agenda item 6B, which I think is Mackie and crew.
Okay.
Great.
Mackie?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we wanted to group these transactions together from an agenda perspective because they're very similar, and we actually have talked at length about whether it made sense just to have all the authorities together. But we've pulled the state agency solar authority out from that solar authority we just talked about because while it is similar, it's quite large. And it's primarily sort of more development capital as opposed to the financing capital, which primarily makes up what we just talked about. So just as background, we've been working with the state of Connecticut now, oh man, I guess just over 4 years on helping them develop a framework for deploying solar at state agencies and on state land and actually developing those projects. Back in 2019, this board approved $5 million in development capital for our pilot projects at the Department of Correction. We have finally, we started construction on those earlier this year. You see a couple photos here of a few of those projects. As you can see, they've progressing quite nicely. Some of them are just about done. And the rest are coming along. Then in April, you approved an increase in authority to $19.5 million, which it was enough to cover the entire cost of building those projects. And then in June of this year, you approved the sale of those projects to Total Energies, as well as $12 million in Green Bank debt to them for those projects. While we've been working on this set of pilot projects, we've also been working on several other portfolios, and those have progressed to the point where we need to come back to you and ask for an increase in that 19.5 million of authority that we have. Next slide, please. There we go. So overall, we're asking for an increase of up to 60 million of capital. And how we get to that number is through the various portfolios laid out here. So you see the SAP1, we call state maps or state projects SAP, sort of our internal
It's
acronym,
like,
solar.
I think maybe you should come up with a new acronym, SAP.
Yeah, we're good. You know, we got to have acronyms for everything.
that one needs to be looked at.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Again, it's for internal purposes only. Let's not tell the state we call them SAPs. So our SAP 1 projects, that's the DOC. You see the total there. SAP 2 is a portfolio of 11 projects of 8.8 megawatts. Those are primarily Department of Transportation and the state technical high schools. We have PPAs signed for those. We have conducted an EPC RFP and selected an installer. So we have that number is backed up by firm pricing. So we have the contracts ready to go. So once the board hopefully approves this authority, we would execute the EPC agreements and get those projects started. Our third portfolio is 4 projects for 4.2 megawatts. This is at the Department of Veteran Affairs and a few of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services sites. The biggest one being Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown. It's about a 2.5 megawatt project there. We have conducted an RFP for these projects as well. So those are pretty firm build costs there. And PPAs are currently in front of the agencies for signature. Once those are signed, we would then use this authority, hopefully granted here today, to sign the construction contracts for those. And then our fourth portfolio is still in its early stages. We've got over 30 megawatts of opportunities identified, but we still need to sort of further flesh those out. And then the first step would be, getting PPAs in place, and then trying to get the NRES. That's the non-residential energy solutions program. The predecessor, excuse me, the successor program to the ZREC. It's the state incentive program. We would need essentially deposits that we would put down for those incentives. That's where that $500,000 comes from. Once we have a better sense of the scope of those projects and the cost, we would come back to you and ask for an increase in this authority to cover those. But at this point, it's just too premature to put a number on that. And then you see a contingency. That's just because, as we've learned from all the commercial solar projects we've done, as well as the SAP1, things change, prices change, unanticipated bumps in the road, or sort of issues with the project materialize as while you're in development. So project costs change. So that's just a contingency to handle that. And just a reminder that this is authority to enter into the contracts to sort of fulfill the obligations under the PPAs that we would be signing with state agencies. This would be the total sum of those contracts to build the projects, but the program is built so that we essentially develop a little bit of the project. We get the incentives. At least for SAP1, we've gotten the permits. We'll likely do that for SAP2, and then we sell the projects before they're done. So we would not expect to expend all of this money, or really anywhere close to it. For instance, with SAP1, we've spent approximately $5 million, and we'll be soon selling these to Total, recouping all that money, and then issuing the debt. So, this is just to give us the authority to enter into the contracts, but we wouldn't expect to expend all this money. We would sell them well before the construction's complete and all this is spent. And I think one other point to make is this does not include any debt or financing that we would provide to these projects. We would separately, like we did for SAP1 with that 12 million in debt, we would separately come to the board with that request. So I'll pause there and take any questions.
This is John Hurdy. At the end of the day, do we know how much this will save the state in energy costs?
I just ran the SAP1 numbers yesterday. The savings there is 7.7 million over the term. I don't have the savings numbers for the second and third portfolios, but we can calculate that and get back to you on that overall number. Unless Emily, unless you're on and have that.
It's really it's an important selling point, I think, and one of the ways of countering, our opposition to us being involved in this stuff. And I think it's way past time for the state to coin a term to lead by example. So this is great.
Yeah, I mean, how many years did it take us to get to this place? Because to John's point, the lead by example, I mean, ad nauseum every session. And actually, the state didn't even have numbers for what it was paying for energy for various entities. So this feels like progress. Any more?
I mean, as you see, the first approval was 2019, so it has been a long time coming, and it's great to see projects almost done, and now we're seeing a nice regular churn of new projects in the pipeline. So it's great I think we're finally there after years and years of work.
Yeah, great. Any questions, concerns, comments?
My question really had to do with, I think your last comment, Mackie, is that this is to be looked at as sort of a revolving fund. So we keep the 60 million on tap and we reinvest whatever's been paid back in new projects for the state.
We looked at when we actually initially structured the request to you that way. But the more we thought about it, it seemed like it should, once we signed a contract for a project, it should essentially take the authority away. And then you're right, once we sell the project, we will recoup all that investment plus more, plus a development fee. But we thought from an oversight perspective, rather than sort of having it replenish, the limit should be on the contracts we're entering into, because otherwise, if it's just on spend, I could go out and sign contracts for 200 million or
Sure.
whatever, and then and then if I spend that 60 million limit, I could just come back, if I got close to it, and say, oh, I need more money, and I've already signed the contract, so we have to do it. So from an oversight perspective, we thought rather than sort of having it revolving, having it apply to just the individual contracts was the sort of more prudent.
I don't think the two ideas are mutually exclusive. If we have in the back of our minds that we have a pool of 60 million, you can come back to us for each new investment. But if we have some objectives as to how much we want to be encouraging the state to continue to do these kinds of projects, we might want to make sure that we got in our back pockets the wherewithal to respond to needs, and even to provoke need a bit, because I think part of our job as board members is to encourage this kind of investment and encourage the state to think more about it, and municipalities as well.
Any more thoughts? Questions? Okay.
Now I have the same problem as John. I can't get my hand down. Is it down? Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh, it's down.
All right.
Okay, and do I hear a motion to approve resolution 9?
So moved. John Hardy.
Thank you, John. Do I hear a second?
Second, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstaining?
This is Joanna. I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Joanna abstaining.
Great, thank you. And for this next transaction, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Duncan.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. These next two transactions are back to CPACE, and they are pretty straightforward, simple transactions. So 30 Grandview Court in Cheshire is a new project brought to us by Smart Roof Solar. It's going for an NRES in the February lottery. The property owners are also the primary tenants, the sole tenants, and they're looking to install 334 kilowatts on their roof. And it's an industrial building, and you can see the price is just over 800,000 with including fees. Next slide, please. Okay, so the terms are 5% construction, 5.75 for the term rate over 20 years. The property value is over 2 million, and you can see the loan to value is 73%, and the lien just about close to 40%, and a very healthy DSCR on this project. And so it's going to be an $800,000 solar project. It will commence in 24 if they win a tariff. And yeah, the owner is, well, the owners of the property and the operating business are two childhood friends who started this business together. And the operating business is a direct mail company called Best Postcards. Next slide. All right, so I don't know if Priyank, do you want to speak to this at all?
Hey, thanks, Catherine. This is Priyank Bhakta. Yes, as Catherine mentioned, the operating entity is a strong cash flowing entity. They started in 2018. They were actually spun out from another organization that they were working at, and they've been rapidly expanding ever since then. So yeah, in other words, if there's any questions, we're happy to answer, but no additional comments on my end.
Okay, and I want to just point out that it's possible in your memos, the proposed benefit assessment might show up as 811,000, and that will only be because the closing fees hadn't been included, and we tend to include those. So you can see on this table, you can see in the second row, the project cost is 811. With the closing fees, it goes to 833, and the savings to investment ratio is a healthy 1.68. Next slide. So if there are no other questions, or if there are any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise.
This is Matt. I have just one comment more than a question. I noticed in the memo that the property got flagged as having an elevated environmental risk, and then that a phase one was done. And I just in our memos and in general, I guess it's a question, and if the answer is no, it's a suggestion. You know, the memos just refer to an ASTM phase one, but Connecticut's a little different than other states, and a lot of people do those ASTM phase ones, and they do not include consistency with the Connecticut specific site guidance criteria that DEEP issued for phase ones. So if we aren't doing it, I would suggest we make sure the consultants we hire to do phase ones, or that we require our clients to hire to do phase ones, conduct it consistent with the site characterization guidance document, which includes a Transfer Act establishment evaluation, importantly. And then we reference that in the memos, so we know that we've got an ASTM that meets DEP's standards.
That's a great recommendation, Matt. We'll take note of that, and I think we'll actually try to set up a 30-minute call with you to kind of take a little deeper dive on that.
Okay, and it shouldn't cost much more, if anything. I mean, most Connecticut companies will do it. Very little added cost.
No,
yeah, we'll check in with our environmental we work with ORMS in West Hartford, where, I mean, obviously if the client already has it, we don't have any, if we're relying on the phase one they already have, it's a done deal, but making sure for everything going forward that we're ordering through RMS, that if they're not, we'll see if they're doing it already, and if not.
And in any case, reflected properly in our credit write-ups.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions or observations? Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 10?
So moved, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Do I hear a second?
This is Rob, second.
Thanks, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay. Now, this is another CPACE project, right?
Yes.
This item. Is that Catherine?
Yep.
Again? Okay, good. Thank you, Catherine. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Yep. So 580 Tolland, East Hartford, you saw this back in April and approved this project, which is closed and actually begun dispersing. but apparently they need to have a significant service upgrade. And we're coming back to you now because the increase is over 10%. The initial project was under 400,000 on the project cost, and you can see it's gone up to 568,000, inclusive of fees with this new service upgrade. Next slide, please. Again, it's in Cheshire, East Hartford, and the owner is someone that we've worked with before. He financed a project through Greenworks at one point, a solar project, and he's come to us for 2 others. He's a portfolio owner that we are getting to know quite well. Terms, 568,000. Property value, you can see, is 1.5 million, 69% LTV and 37% lien to value, and a decent SDSCR, not compared to the other, but still good at 1.32. Okay, so this is just a comparison, a rough comparison of the changes in the amounts. You can see, obviously, a surface upgrade has no impact on savings, so all the, the savings to investment ratio goes down, as does the DSCR, and the liens, the ratios go up, but nothing significant. Next slide. And we still have a 1.35 SIR, so it's a strong project still. And the terms haven't changed, none of the terms have changed. Next slide. If there are any questions.
No questions? Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 7?
This is Rob, I'll motion to. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. So that would be who's
John will motion, I'll second. How's that?
Great, that's good. All right, I like it. Thank you, gentlemen. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay. Yeah, this, let's see, the next slide. So we're moving the SS update to January. So
Perfect.
are we going into executive session now?
No, we've got one more item before executive session, and we're going to turn this over to our new Director of Environmental Infrastructure, Lee Welton, to give us an overview of our process for waste and recycling.
Oh,
so
great.
Lee, you there?
Hello, Lee.
Hello. And I am going to try and keep to time because I know we need to get you folks to executive session. So we're switching gears a little bit and really excited to show you how we're beginning our initial approach to the very huge problem of waste in Connecticut. So as folks well know, the Green Bank is now authorized to engage in waste and recycling issues, and that is under our scope expansion into environmental infrastructure as per PA 21115. So this is intended as just an update on our strategic approach, as well as to explain a little bit about the primary development process and where we're headed. I'll also just note at the outset here that while we are experienced on organics and solar PV and battery waste, the broader issue, of waste, and especially municipal solid waste, is new to many of us, and largely the organization writ large. Certainly has not been my area of expertise. However, that said, Bert Hunter is definitely our in-house expert and an utter font of knowledge, if I can say so, Bert, on all things waste and recycling. We're also going to be building the team around us to achieve it, along with the primary development process, which is really about growing our understandings and capabilities. So just going to jump right in here in the interest of time. So we have approached the scope expansion for 21115 by breaking out each sector of environmental infrastructure, and that is, as you can see here, parks and recreation, land conservation, agriculture, water, Now waste and recycling. This is the kind of last of the 5 primers as we think about the different sectors of environmental infrastructure. And just to remind folks that environmental infrastructure includes the overarching mandates of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, climate adaptation and resilience, and greenhouse gas mitigation. So to date, we've completed every primer on these sectors except for waste and recycling, which will, as we're showing you today, be a big focus of 2024, being completed by the end of the coming calendar year. Next slide. Do I need to? Okay. So where do we come at this broad issue as a green bank, and what are some good entry points for us? Well, just thinking about it from a macro perspective, it's a particularly complex problem. The policy is very much still in development. There are many challenges associated with getting municipalities on the same page as the state. Also, Connecticut is an extremely constrained environment, given landfill closures and an absolute inability to build additional landfill in state. There is simply no available space. So this primer development process is our way of doing the homework, doing the work to understand, Brian would suggest 80%, somewhere in there, there's an 80-20 rule, but as much relevant background and context as we can wrap our heads around here to try and better understand the market opportunity for waste and recycling. Next slide. So just a quick word, high level on solar PV and battery storage. Our success has supported greenhouse gas reduction, but also created a future waste stream problem after the useful life cycle of panels and battery units. So really, a lot of this primer development process and the strategy that we're introducing today is about addressing that future problem, which is not just ours. It's a collective challenge for the clean energy sector. To put this in perspective, our solar PV residential battery storage and non-residential battery storage are poised to create 41,000 tons of potential waste. And I say potential because that's what this is about, is trying to make sure that we can address as much as possible. That is if they end up in landfill. And that is not to mention the actual material problems from each unit, depending on what's in there, where they were manufactured. So a little bit of social math here to help kind of hammer this home. The 41,000 tons of waste would be 45 Olympic swimming pools. My background is in wildlife ecology and in sub-Saharan Africa. So you're going to hear about 11,714 female African elephants. Or if we were to think about loading up all of the waste and putting it into a standard train car, that would take up over 1,100 train cars. And if it were all in one train, that train would stretch for about 10 miles. So just trying to help you all understand what some of the magnitude is of what we're up against. Next slide. Switching over into the kind of waste streams and the issue of landfill. So for the big picture of Connecticut and municipal solid waste, in the year 2021, food waste constituted approximately 22% of the state's total waste stream, and also 60% of greenhouse gas generation from landfill. So food scraps is a particularly pernicious part of Connecticut's waste streams. This is also, landfill is where currently those 41,000 tons of PV and battery waste will likely wind up unless alternative measures are taken, and most likely falling under the construction and demolition waste stream category here. I'll just note the table on the right, this does not account for freight transit emissions for trucking Connecticut's waste out of state to facilities elsewhere. I mentioned Connecticut no longer has municipal solid waste landfills, so all state-generated municipal solid waste that is landfilled out of state. And I just highlighted as an Ohioan that this means that a significant portion, in this case almost 200,000 tons of waste, were sent 652 miles to beautiful Sunny Farms landfill in Ohio. So just trying to help people understand the extent to which even just the transit itself is a source of emissions. Next slide. So this all leads us into a three-pronged strategy on waste and recycling: collective responsibility, and that's really about assessing existing products used in solar and battery installation and establishing a quote-unquote collective responsibility to reuse, recycle, and dispose of those materials properly. Scaling up solutions. This really is the continuation of a pilot program that we launched to address food and farm waste to energy through investment in anaerobic digester infrastructure. And then third, support the state. So be prepared to support DEEP when their assistance is requested. And in doing so, support the DEEP Commissioner's goals for waste management and recycling, entering into agreements with DEEP for bonding and financing as is appropriate. Next slide. All right, so just to keep to time, I'll blast through here just to describe a little bit more. When we think about collective responsibility from an ethics perspective, we supported and continue to support the deployment of this technology. We want to make sure we're good stewards of the waste, of those impacted by the waste, and also really thinking about the ways that we are required by PURA to provide suggestions for solar and storage dockets about which recommendations we think are best for the state of Connecticut. So working with relevant state agencies and also thinking about the stakeholder engagement aspects of our primary development process, which kind of encompasses a lot of this. Next slide. For scaling up solutions, strategy 2, this is really about promoting green bank capital solutions to developers of organic waste to energy projects, e.g. anaerobic digester projects, and supporting DEEP with implementation of anaerobic digester procurement policy, which is relevant and listed below. Next slide. Just to highlight, part of what we'll be doing is hopefully getting the board out to see the food waste to energy anaerobic digester project that we did with Quantum Biopower. So stay tuned for more on that. But also just to say that we are experienced in this. So that's hence we say scale up strategies, scale up solutions. Next slide. And the main takeaway for our strategy number 3, support the state, is that we have a team working with DEEP on this. So we want to reassure you that we're on it. And that's really going to be translating the technicality of any legislation. DEEP is in the process of completing a material management study, which has to be approved by the Environment Committee. When that's done, they can then issue an RFP for projects that meet recommendations of that study. And as part of that process, they can also request the Green Bank support for access to capital for project implementation. Last slide here. Thank you. So really just to let you know where we're headed, we are initiating outreach to stakeholders and potential project sponsors. Those are the Blue Earth Environmentals, Quantum Biopower, Waste Zeros, and many, many others. We'll be making this presentation and engaging with DEEP to let them know where our strategies are set. We are planning various staff engagement activities, and that ranges from food bank volunteerism to personal waste inventories and more. Thinking about staff and board site visits, so very much hope to get you all out to, say, Fort Hill Farms or to Quantum Biopower to see some of our anaerobic digester capacity in action. Also potentially thinking about a site visit to a solar PV recycling plant or a battery storage recycling plant. So thinking about seeing those technologies and practices in action. And then the primer writing and development process. So as told, that will be concluded by end of calendar year 2024. So very much a big focus of ours in the year to come. And then in tandem and alongside that primer development process, really thinking about how we use this process to also help prime the project opportunity pipeline. So I think that's my 10 or 11 minutes here, and I'll stop there.
Any questions? I want to be on all the field trips. Hope everybody else will too.
My only
I love
question
seeing
is,
this stuff.
my
Go ahead,
my only
Matt.
question is, has anyone reached out directly to Rob Flea? This is right up his alley as well. Maybe, I know we have the ability to do that under our bylaws. Might be worth, if we haven't done it, calling him and getting his thoughts and input, or just let him know this is active. I believe that was his, I don't know, one of his degrees was in waste.
It's a good point, Matt. Yeah, we'll flag it. We'll follow up with him. Yeah, he's an industrial ecologist, and many of us who studied industrial ecology underneath Marion Chertow, who in the end of life perspective that Lee presented, we all now feel guilty that we hadn't thought about the end of life in the success of our program. So we're now trying to create some collective responsibility to address it. So yeah, Rob will be on our list, Lee, maybe January.
And I see Joanna's hand up, and also maybe John, but Joanna first.
Just a flag. I expect to be reaching out back to the Green Bank on OPM and DEEP fulfilling Section 23 of Public Act 23-170, which requires us to establish a study on the governance structure regarding waste management. Well, I also expect us to be requesting an extension based on what was originally proposed in the legislation, but coming back around to the Green Bank on that at a future date.
This is John. I just wanted to say that my understanding is that Europe has made a lot of progress with this type of stuff, including putting the responsibility back on manufacturers for the products that they put out in terms of recycling at the end of use. So I'm hoping that I don't see us getting that legislation on the state level anytime soon, but we should be looking at what those countries are doing as well.
I'd say also for food scrap, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Europe on organics management. So John, I think what you're proposing is joining our field trip to Belgium.
Here we go. All right.
Definitely. I'll be on the subcommittee, yes.
Any more observations, or anybody
Thank you
want to
all.
sign up for any additional field trips? Okay.
All right. So thank you. We moved through a lot of agenda items there. We're running a little bit late here as we transition into executive session, but thank you all. You could see we had a lot of things going on. That's why we pushed the residential battery and solar affordable housing to January, so we can give that more time. So now we're going to transition into executive session, and I'm gonna see if Brenda Watson is on the line. We see a phone number there. Just want to see if Brenda's on. If so, say yes. And then Eric is going to transition us now into a breakout room. So you're going to see us move here in transition. So we'll turn it to Eric. Give us a second.
There's a question or a hand.
Is that John?
That's John. That's John. Okay.
Yeah. Somebody get rid of that, please.
I got to work on that one. So not hearing anything from Brenda, I will move this to executive session. Bear with me.
I was suggest.
Sorry. Yeah, we should do a resolution to move us into executive session. Forgive me, I should have said that.
Okay.
Do I hear
a motion to move into executive session?
I move we move into executive session for the reasons stated on the agenda.
Thank you. You're here, second. Thank you, John. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? All right, let's go. Executive session.
No.
All right. Okay, great. So thank you.
It's moving.
Yeah, 1 second. We're still doing the transition here.
And I would suggest, if there is a technical issue, I would suggest that staff drop off, because if the separate room doesn't work out, you can at least stay in the.
They can't hear you. You've already moved to executive session, Brian.
Let's see. So how are we looking with?
Everybody, so we have in executive session, I show Adrian, Joanna, Matt, Tom Flynn has not moved. I don't see Tom on. Hank is there. Rob, Lonnie.
I see folks there. Yep. And I'm going to try to share my
Dominic,
screen.
John. Here, don't do yours. I will do mine.
Give me 1 second, gang. We're going to try to share our screens here.
Hold off.
See.
I'm going to share mine.
Okay. Okay, great. Let me get mine off screen. All right. How are we looking?
As I said, this is our last board meeting of our regular board meeting of 2023, and our next one, I think it's January 26, 2024. And, you know, happy holidays, joy-filled times with friends and family, and thanks everybody for being here. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Happy
Opposed?
holidays, all.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, now quickly, before anybody forgets, who motioned for resolution 12 and seconded? You're muted.
Matt Rinelli and